This is Jules, and I'm with Lenny.
Hello.
Today. And we're in a bit of an echoey room, so we're sort of struggling with that. Today, what we're talking about, is how we identify ourselves. I recently started leaning much more into the trans identity. As you know, with Fiona Dobson, we've seen Fiona Dobson, the cross-dressing website, sort of shift to the trans website. As one leads into that identity, as one says, okay, so I'm trans. Well, there's that temptation, and I see this in an awful lot of people who are blogging online and who are doing online essays, whatever, and there are some really beautiful ones. But they're sort of centered entirely on the idea of I am trans. Well, I know that I'm trans, but I also know I'm a writer. I'm a failed clarinetist and guitarist. I'm also relatively spiritual. I have some spiritual beliefs, whether they be pagan or Christian or whatever they may be. In other words, I am many things. Now, when you were growing up, you were in a small town in Alaska. And at some point, you must have sort of said, okay, well, I kind of like the girls a little more than I like the boys, and I'm something. I know very well I'm bisexual. I don't know whether do you actually identify as bisexual or do you identify as lesbian? You have talked about your lesbian cred. Tell me a bit about that.
Oh, okay. So there was in the 90s. There was a lot of bi was not a very cool thing. Like you were either straight or you were gay, but being bi was like nobody liked you. So I sort of weirdly enough went into the bi closet and just sort of lived the lesbian lifestyle because that was because identifying as bisexual. I sort of 30 years later came out of the bi closet and was like, yeah, no, I've always been bi. I just have lived a lesbian lifestyle for most of my life. But yes, there is that thing of identifying and how do you self-identify. But the thing is, as I get older, is that recognition that you get to change. And there are times in my life where I've identified very strongly as lesbian. I'm bi. I've always been bi. But because that was where my political and lifestyle
and you've been an advocate for a lot of lesbian issues.
Yeah, exactly. And being an advocate. And but then there's other times in my life where I'm identifying more as an artist.
Right.
Other times I've been identified as a lesbian artist, and that became really annoying because then I just was like, somebody please hire me to do something that wasn't a queer show. But I got kind of typecast. So when you identify, you have a tendency of getting typecast in something. There's people have an expectation. Oh, well, if you're a lesbian, then you must be, well, you're very leftist and you're a vegetarian, right?
Kombucha all the way.
Kombucha all the way. And that's not necessarily the case.
In other words, that's not necessarily who you are.
Yes, I think that
this is very interesting, though, because a lot of people who are trans, they tend to take that as absolutely the definition of who they are. Now, I know that whilst I'm trans, I'm also a writer. I'm also a father. I'm also a number of other things. Now, if someone said, who are you? Summarize it in 10 words or something, I would probably go to I'm a father. I'm relatively creative in the sort of journalistic or writing world, but I'm also trans. It wouldn't be the first thing I would say. Now, I think there is an unfortunate trope, if you like. There's an unfortunate situation where people define themselves as trans first and then other things perhaps, but maybe you don't even hear that. And I think perhaps in the lesbian community the same. I'm lesbian and, well,
I think that's a comment on society in general, that there's a tendency towards a reductionist, that was a good word, a reductionist way of thinking of things, right? She's a mother. That's all you need to know about her. She's a mother. You don't need to know that she's a world-class gymnast.
Right.
Obviously, if she's a mother, that's all she's allowed to be. She can't also be all of these other things. It's very easy to put people into these categories.
This is the danger of labels.
Right, this is the danger of labels. So, if you're a father, well, you can't be trans. You've had perfectly successul marriages and you've got kids. You father children. You're obvious.
There are plenty of trans people who are married, I assure you.
Exactly. There's it's a very reductionist way of looking at the world.
Absolutely.
But more and more things are becoming kind of reductionist. That is like, are you sweet or salty? Well, we can't possibly be sweet and salty.
That's the thing, isn't it? The world is more complex than we are being sort of conditioned to think of it as. And I've gone on to you, Lenny, many times about my theory that one of the biggest problems these days is that people are intransigent. They take a position and they are just not willing to hear alternative thought. If one says, I am this and that's it, that's kind of too simplified. I mean, it's too bloody binary.
And I do understand that can be part of the process, right? It's like there was when I first came out of the closet, and it was the 90s, it was the height of the AIDS epidemic, I was first and foremost dyke because I felt like I had a lot to fight for and I was holding a line. As my life got more complicated and there was kids involved in my life and there was other career options and there was all of these things, at which point then I still was queer, lesbian, artist, woman, advocate, lefty, politically active. Still all those things, but at different times in my life, some of those have taken priorities. So this is the thing, is there's also this sense of we can't change. Or if I did shift, my queer advocacy had for a few years took a backseat to, my artistic career.
Right.
And then for a while that all took a backseat, when my nephew was going through a difficult time and I became more of a parent for a while, and that became the priority. And people, where are your politics?
In other words, we're a kaleidoscope. We're
Yeah.
not one thing or another. We are many things.
And we can change, and we can change our minds about, we can kind of shift around that. And I'm not any less of a, at the time where I was focusing on parenting a troubled teenager, I wasn't any less of an advocate. I just didn't, that wasn't my daily focus for a while.
That wasn't front and center.
That wasn't front and center, right? It was parenting.
Now, I mean, very much on your journey here, when you started out, and we're talking about in the 90s, I think, because you're a little younger than I am, but that was a very hot moment within the LGBTQ period where
it was the middle of the war.
You describe it as the war.
Yeah.
And that is where AIDS is vilified
It was
by
the height of the
mainstream.
epidemic. Yeah.
And, I mean, you've described some really interesting situations where, for instance, the lesbian community gets into things like blood donation to support the gay community because they are both outside of the norm. And those are stories which are sadly somewhat untold.
Unheard, not untold.
Okay, unheard.
Yeah.
And I mean, you came through this from an Alaskan perspective, which is slightly outside of the US or outside of Canada.
Well, it's an American perspective. Yeah.
It's an American perspective.
But wasn't that? Yeah. Yeah.
Now, coming out of that, in what was at the time probably a relatively unsophisticated LGBTQ world, you are either one thing or another. Now, by the time we get into the 20s, or the noughties they call it now, 2000, and the 2010s, and then the 2020s, we're in a much more sophisticated place now, where there are any number of gradations within the LGBTQ, fill in the gap with the alphabet, where you've got non-binary, you've got gender fluid, you've got lesbian, you've also got kind of these TERF, gender critical people coming along as well. Holding identity, when you start thinking about who am I, it's getting very hard to pick a label. And you've said yourself about, my lesbian credentials or, my lesbian card, I think you've got.
It's lesbian cred, my lesbian cred, that there is a place.
Can you lose it?
I
Do you lose it with bisexuality, for instance? I mean, I know I'm bi, and I'm now in a position where I have no reservations about saying it. I actually think pretty much everybody's bi. But there are a lot of people who, even now, still think bisexuality is kind of a deviant thing.
Well, I think it depends on the generation. I think that right now the younger generation would probably think anybody who wasn't was kind of deviant.
Yeah, you're right, because the younger generation, and this is a really interesting aspect of this, The younger people in this equation are far more sort of laissez-faire. Frankly, they don't care. As you said once, of your nephew.
Yes.
If what was the
Okay, so
phraseology?
my nephew and I were on a long road trip, and he was a teenager, and I said to him, "So, really, where do you sit on the LGBTQIA plus scale? Where do you sit on that?" And and he was, "Oh yeah, whatever." It was kind of, his attitude was whatever. And I said, "No, really, if a guy hit on you, like how would you really react to this?" And he said to me, he goes, "Auntie Len, I'm a teenage boy. If anybody wants to have sex with me, my answer is yes. Just yes, please, anything, anywhere, anytime."
Just to contextualize this for Fiona Dobson listeners, we are in Canada here, and Lenny travelled by train all around the US with her nephew, showing him this beautiful country in the USA. But here we are, and this evening we were out walking the dogs. You probably heard Sushi,
My dog, Sushi.
Lenny's dog, just rattling a collar a moment ago. But we just came back from the beach where there was a really attractive looking RCMP officer. You know, the RCMP, we always get our man. And he's sitting in his truck there. And, we were both kind of leching at the guy, weren't we, really?
No, you were leching at the guy.
Well, I was, but it makes it easier if I say you were as well.
He was probably the same age as my nephew.
He was hot there. I mean, that whole RCMP uniform, can you imagine that falling to the floor? Anyway, it's all kind of fun to think about it. But
who says I haven't seen that before? Looks just as good on her as it does on him.
But the long and the short of this is, I think that the younger generation, and you can probably draw the line somewhere in the millennials area, they have a far, far more comfortable view of gender and of sexuality than those of us.
Well, you said the story that from your daughter.
Oh gosh, yeah. No, I'll tell that briefly. Where basically I took her to a grad party, which was at a very nice hotel downtown in Vancouver, a wonderful place. And I was looking across the room at one of her friends, and I was trying to figure out, is this person male or female? So I said to my little girl, "Who's your friend over there?" And she says to me, "Oh, that's Robin." Okay, that's a lot of help. And then I said, "Well, is Robin a boy or a girl?" And my daughter looks at this person and says, and keep in mind, they've been at school for 12 years together. My daughter looks at her and turns to me and says, "I don't know," and then carries on with the conversation. And it just doesn't matter. And oh my God, that is the world we want.
Well, my nephew was dating a person named Joe. Doesn't narrow it down. And I guess it had sort of come out to his mother that Joe had been a boy, but had identified as female for a while. And so my sister said to her son, "So does that mean you're gay?" And my nephew goes, "No, Joe's a girl." And my sister goes, "So, but does Joe have a penis?" And my nephew looks at his mother and goes, "You want to know about my girlfriend's genitalia? That's just gross, Mom. It's just gross."
Well, it is. I mean, how many people say, "Oh, you're dating so-and-so. Is he circumcised?"
Exactly.
What the hell?
That's just gross.
Exactly.
It's just gross. And I just love that was Stafford's reaction to his mom. Like, "No, I'm not gay. I'm dating a girl. But does your girlfriend have a penis?" That's just gross, Mom. Why would you want to know?
I've got to lean into the ContraPoints words here, the mouthfeel. I'm sorry, talking about your nephew, that's probably too much.
Again, this is my nephew. I don't want to know.
Exactly. And I think when people actually do talk about trans issues, and when they talk about bisexual issues, even when they talk about gay issues or lesbian, actually the mechanics of it, the engineering of it, the gynecology of it, It's just not important.
Well, that's the
thing.
thing.
Do you enjoy each other?
When people talk about the trans issues, the gay issues, or say what it really comes down to is that they're yucked out by it. It's just they're
This
just
is the don't yuck my yum.
don't yuck my yum. Like it's just yucky. Like they think it's yucky. Okay, fine. You are welcome to think what I do is yucky. I maybe think what you do is yucky. That doesn't really matter. But then don't do that thing.
Well, I personally can say I've looked over my own shoulder thinking, what are they doing? Oh my God, what are they doing? Oh my God, what are they? Oh God, don't stop that.
Hey, keep it safe for work, my friend.
But you get the idea, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like it doesn't. Do you really want to know?
Just enjoy it.
Well, but I think that this is it. People get judgy on other people on many, many levels. So I don't. Surprise! I don't shave anything. I shave nothing. So I was out with a bunch of lesbians, and one of the lesbians said to me, "You don't shave your pits? That's really gross. Why don't you shave your pits?" And this is one of the other lesbians. And I looked at her. Now she's like my best friend's wife. And I looked at her and says, "Are you gonna lick my pits?" And she's like, "What?" I'm like, "If you are gonna lick my pits, I will shave right now for you. If you have no intention of licking my pits, keep it to yourself. It's none of your business what I do with my hairy bod, unless you want to do something intimate with it."
I'll lick your pits.
Right? Sure. This is great. So great. I just find people who want to lick my hairy pits. It's great.
You are a pervert.
I'm such a pervert. No, I'm not a pervert.
But the thing is, I mean, well, actually, no, I want to just follow that one through a moment. I know that you do some garage sales and bits and pieces, and you had sold some old adult magazines.
Oh, yeah.
And you described once someone finding like a 1970s copy of Playboy.
Right. So I, one of my kind of fun side gigs was, the American Pickers, seeing the American Pickers. So I did like picking, and it's fun. And I go through garages. And one of the things I really loved to find was vintage porn. And it just gets fun. So I'm selling the vintage porn, and there's all these boxes. And one of the things that a lot of people like to do is find the magazine from their birth year and month. It's kind of fun to look at. I find. So there's a woman, and she was looking through, a young woman, and she was looking through an old, the old Playboys, and she found an old one from the 70s, or maybe early 80s, and she was flipping through it, and she was really standing there for a long time looking at the centerfold, and she had just this interesting look on her face.
I've got to ask you, how old is she?
She was in her 20s, early 20s. Right. So she's, she wasn't even born when this magazine came out. And she's like really studying the centerfold model. And she kind of had this weird look on her face. I'm like, "You okay? Like, if this is upsetting you, like, put the magazine down." And she looked at it, and she just looks at me, and her face was just this, like, wide wonder on her face. She goes, "She looks like me." And I'm like, oh, is this good? Is this bad? What does this mean? And she goes, "She looks like me. Like, she's got her breasts are small, and she's got a blemish on her butt. Like, it was before airbrushing." And then she looked at me and she goes, "She's beautiful."
Yeah.
But when I looked, I just wanted to cry. Where there's this young woman with her face, she's such a beautiful. Anybody in their 20s, they're beautiful, right? And she's looking at this and she goes, she looks like me, and she's beautiful, and she's got blemishes, and she's got hair, and she's not hairless, because back then Playboy models still had hair where women grow hair. And,
horror.
Horror. And so I was like, "You can have that magazine." And she's like, no, I want to buy it. She wanted to buy that magazine to remind herself that she looked like this, and she was sexy.
That is a terribly sad comment on the aesthetic of the feminine today, because we've created this thing which, frankly, it looks kind of like Barbie, which I loved the movie, but it looks kind of like Barbie in that it's just not real.
Yeah.
I mean, give us real people. Give me spots on my apples. What was that song? It'll Come to Me, Joni Mitchell, I think. but I'll probably put a link to it in the description later. Let's have some real.
Yeah. This is what
Big Yellow Taxi, that's what it was.
What was it?
The Big Yellow Taxi song.
Mm.
Yeah, give me spots on my apples. Something.
Right.
But the whole point being is, where's your reality? We've created this world where, everything is so saccharine sweet, and it's got to look a certain way, and actually all we're setting up is massive disappointment.
And I'm going to go back to reductionist. Basically, it's taking things and it's taking all the complications out. We don't actually want an attractive woman, but with a blemish on her butt.
FionaDobson.com, where you have new words that you learn. Reductionist.
Where things are complicated.
It is complicated.
And
thank God it is.
Like, I am an attractive, mostly live a lesbian lifestyle with a transgender lover and a kid. Like, it's
Okay.
complicated. You're a trans father.
In other words, and when we think of identity, we cannot just stick a label on it. We have to think in terms of we are a complex organism. Now, I do consider myself trans, but I also consider myself a writer. I also consider myself a father. I also consider myself something of a performer.
Mm-hmm.
I am many, many things. I'm a kaleidoscope. And in my dealings with other trans people, but also other people in the LGBTQ community, we are so many things. I think there's a bit of a danger trying to stick one label on us. We should just accept ourselves as complex.
We are complex, but this is it. There's a lot of people out there who want us to be one label because then it's very easy for them to hate us. It's a target.
That resonates. That sounds true. And that's difficult.
Right. So people don't want to...
Actually, in fact, what you're saying does actually remind me of something Mia Mulder said. And that is when people put a label on you, it's usually so they can put a target on you.
Mm. Right. So it's a bit like the pink triangle. The pink triangle, which is a symbol of
absolutely
of queer pride, started out with literally sticking labels on people. Right? They're going to stick the pink triangle so they can identify the queers, to ship them off to camps, and then years later, we as queer people took that pink triangle and stuck it on ourselves to say, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. That was the marching chant. We're
absolutely.
here, we're queer, get used to it. So we put that label on ourselves so we were in fact putting a target on us saying, we dare you. We dare you. There's tens of thousands of millions of us. We dare you.
Well, this is one of the things which crosses my mind at the moment, where people are having tattoos and things like this, and they're writing things online which will basically stay there forever. When you see some of the switch to the right, which we see, some of these things might not be a great label to have.
That's if you feel like you're willing to go back into the closet, I guess. I'm not.
I'm not sure what the answer to this is, but I think at the end of the day, from the point of view of anyone who is trans or lesbian or in the LGBTQ realm, it's we are who we are.
But see,
don't use that to necessarily identify us.
But you're seeing this now with a swing back to the right with women, right?
Well, I'm
thinking we won a lot of rights over our own body, which are now being rolled back.
How the hell did that happen?
It's insane. So what am I supposed to do now that I have an education and a career? Now I'm supposed to go back into the closet and just say,
we've got a nice little place for
sir.
you in Stepford Close.
Yeah, exactly.
You can be one of them. Well,
we
live in difficult times.
That's just...
But I think when we think about individuals rather than the greater environment, and I think community is hugely important in this, but when we think of us as a group, I think we should be aware that there's a lot to the idea of one can say, I'm transgender and a father, or and X, Y, and Z, or I'm lesbian and a mother. I'm lesbian and such. In other words, it's way more complicated. Okay, this has been Lenni and Jules, and we're talking to you from Vancouver, BC, where we can still have a few drinks and light up a nice joint, and it is completely legal. You can find more trans content on FionaDobson.com, and good night.